This podcast is part of the continuing series of interviews with innovation thought leaders. This week is part 2 of the interview with Jeffrey Moore. In addition to being the author of the business best-selling book Crossing the Chasm, Jeffrey is co-founder of TCG Advisors and founder of the Chasm Group. He is also a venture partner at Moore David Dow Ventures. Enjoy.
This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
So you think about what's going on, here in the economy in the U.S. and given everything that's going on in the administration, how do we reignite innovation? You and I come up through the Apollo programs and DARPA funding and the innovations that got spun off. So,
well, I think it's interesting. So I think that the biggest ignition of innovation is fear. So if you think about the Apollo program, Kennedy said, it's on record, he didn't care about space. He cared about the Russians. He cared about Sputnik. And I think what happens is global. So I think global warming, climate change is going to be the Apollo program stimulus of our this next several decades. I think inconvenient truth, God bless Al Gore, I think he lit the fire, and not that it wasn't burning, but I think now what's going to happen is, and then I think this healthcare thing that Obama was talking about yesterday on the radio is another one. These are two forcing functions where you say, look, we are on the current course and speed, we have a massive train wreck. And the human race has not been very good, frankly, about looking that far down the track. But sooner or later, it's like, whoa, that train's getting a little close. And so all of a sudden, what we seem to do as a race is we ignore, and then we go, oh my God. And when we go, oh my God, there's this incredible sucking sound that creates an innovation opportunity that's fabulous.
Well, I think that speaks to kind of the ability of human ingenuity, right? When crises is in our face, we have this unbelievable ability to reach down into our bootstraps and solve the problem.
Right.
But you're right. We tend to suffer from our ability to kind of avoid the problem in the first place. Would be.
But see, so what's so cool about what you just said there is when you say innovation to most people, they actually think of having their feet up, possibly a margarita within reach, dreaming about some wonderful, beautiful idea. And the truth about innovation is the great innovations, at least my instinct about innovation, is it's an adrenaline-driven, anxiety-driven mission, which obviously has lots of joy in it. There's lots of endorphins in the middle of this thing, but there's also a lot of fear hormones going. Until your back's well and truly against the wall, you don't really reach down for that final capability that you have.
Right. So talk, because fear is the thing that holds people back. You hear about people, what's the old story, right? The best place for ideas is in a graveyard because they were dreams that were never realized, right? Because of the fear factor of people never wanting to step out. Right. So how do you help people who really got the passion, but the fear is just crippling for them?
Well, I think if the fear is crippling for you, look, the world needs a lot of people. We have this metaphor called inventors, deployers, and optimizers, and then orchestrators who sort of try to keep the three of them all effective. The world needs all three. The world, in fact, if you don't have a very strong optimization engine, you can't free up the resources to deploy the next generation of invention. So if somebody says, I really am fearful, then don't do it. Do what you're good at, because it's not like we use the word innovation as synonymous with invention in the Valley in particular. But I'm kind of passionate about saying no. Inventors innovate, so do deployers, so do optimizers. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of innovation in optimizing things and in taking an existing process and making it more efficient, and it's very fulfilling. So, but if you want to be an inventor, which means I'm going to do stuff that's never been done before, you can't be very fearful. You should be respectful. You can't be cavalier, because you break things when you invent. You always do. Mm-hmm. And you make mistakes, and people do get hurt. So you have to be respectful and humble about that, but you can't be fearful about it.
Right. I think you bring a big point, right? People tend to think when you quote run an innovation organization inside large corporations that your sole focus is on products and services, when in reality it's everything from supply chain logistics, corporate structure, industry structures, new geographies, you know.
Cultural trends. Yeah,
You know.
yeah, and that's why, boy, that's such an important point because I think they think it's all labs, and I think they think it's all ideation.
Right.
And both of those are important, but I think I think our culture, in the sort of post-romantic Western culture where, the romantics were all about, it's the individual, it's about inspiration, it's about intuition, it's not about the team, it's not about plans, it's not about reason, it's more about passion and whatever. And that was a good corrective at the time, but I think we've kind of overplayed that hand a bit. And collaboration is becoming a much more central component of innovation than it was when you and I were growing up.
Yep.
When you and I were growing up, it was the genius. It was
the guy sitting at the bench.
Right. And the guy at the bench, and maybe it was a project team.
Right.
The Macintosh team, with Steve, don't drink the Odwalla, in the special room building at Apple. But it wasn't this sense of customer co-innovation. It wasn't supply chain collaborative innovation. There wasn't that sense of fabric. We didn't have the technologies that would let us do it. The Halos and the WebExes and all this kind of stuff.
Right. I mean, in fact, you're seeing more and more where even large corporations are coming together to co-innovate. So talk a little bit about, because that creates a whole, you got how do you innovate within the organization? Now, how do you innovate amongst 2 or 3 coming together to drive those kinds of
It's actually, in a funky way, it's actually easier. The hardest person to collaborate with is a brother or a sister, because at least when you're coming together with 2 or 3 corporations, what you have to do, the key idea is you have to collectively make a market that makes money for all of the players,
Right.
And in ways that where at the margins you might compete, because we're used to that. But at the center points, each player has a unique contribution to make that, frankly, the other 2 players really either can or wouldn't be appropriate to make. Because in this global economy, what's happened is we've all had to specialize in order to get differentiated enough to earn to earn margin. Right. So the idea of being vertically integrated, which was HP's claim to fame in the 80s.
Right.
Like, no. So you have a highly disaggregated supply chain. You do a bunch of stuff in-house, but you do a lot of stuff outside. And a design chain, and you've got P&G saying the same thing in the other direction. We want half of our R&D to be done by people that don't work for P&G. So because we're specialized, we're inherently disaggregated. So now how do we come together? And we have to come together around economics that incent us to collaborate. So I see how by collaborating with you, I'm going to make more money. And I see that if I don't collaborate with you, I'm going to actually get shut out of making more money. And then I think it's a question of just making sure you don't have too many people at the table. One of the problems with collaboration is at the margin, people think, well, adding one more person to the meeting. But you know what happens to a creativity meeting. It's either the 4th or the 5th person should not have been added.
Right.
And by the time you're 6 people in a room, it ain't going to happen.
Right.
And usually there's 24.
Right. Yeah. Innovating by committee, just as you're begging for disaster.
And the same thing. So I think that you can get 3 genuine interests together. I think it's very hard to get 4, and after 4, I think it's impossible.
So talk a little bit about Jeffrey in the early days. You were a former professor, right, from Michigan. Yeah. Actually, I've run into more of your students.
Really?
Who were students of yours. I'm trying to remember, what's the name of the school again?
Olivet College?
Olivet College.
Wow. Well, so what happened was I grew up in Oregon. I always wanted to be, actually, I was interested in both math and English, but when I got to college, I was better at English than math. So I went to English. I wanted to be an English professor. I always wanted to be a teacher. Arguably, I've always have been a teacher. And then was teaching, and I got a doctorate in medieval and Renaissance literature. I was still passionate about it, teaching away in Michigan. But our family really belonged in California. And so after 4 years there, we said, look, we have to move back to California. And there was no jobs in education at that time. So I just said, well, I'll get it. That was we're talking about innovation risk. So that was my risk. And it was in support of our family. So I've gone to Stanford. So I thought, well, somebody's going to be able to find me a job in the Bay Area. And I joined a software firm as a training specialist, knowing nothing about software, but something about training. And then I just kind of worked my way through it. So I became a kind of an assistant to the president. And I thought, well, I can't be a staff guy for the rest of my life. I either have to make it or sell it. And I thought making it was a stretch. So I thought, okay, sell it. I wasn't a very good salesperson, but I got myself into the sales force. And then I found out while I wasn't very good at selling, I was really good at telling stories about the product. So I was a great storyteller. So then it's like, oh, marketing. And then I got the big breakthrough for me was we'd been a client. I was in a startup that was a client of Regis McKenna. And then when I got out of work, because my third startup went belly up, I started consulting because my daughter was going to college, so that was easy. And after about 6 weeks, I'd made more money than I'd made in any 6 weeks of my life. I thought, this is kind of fun, but I don't really know what I'm doing. And Regis McKenna was hiring. And so I joined Regis, and at that time, Regis McKenna was kind of at the center of high-tech marketing and kind of inventing it. And so you saw the most unbelievable class of customers coming through those doors, and the problems were just fascinating. And so it was just like a kid in a candy store. And in the middle of that, and I was really good at problem solving. I wasn't very good at managing. So fairly quickly they said, Jeff, you don't have to manage. It's okay. It's like, it's all right. Okay, well, thank you. But here's what we do need you to do. We want you to continue to contribute to these various problem solving sessions. So I had this incredible wide aperture sort of exposure to high-tech issues. And that's where in the middle of that, it was like, the Chasm idea came from a very simple idea, because we were using the technology adoption lifecycle. Regis had brought that into high-tech marketing. But what was happening was, we'd have these early successes, and we'd just think, boy, this is the next Apple, this is the next Intel, this is the next Tandem, we're on our way. And then you'd say, whatever happened to those guys? Because 2 years later, they had the same 3 customers on their customer list, and it's like, what happened? And so that led to the sort of re-examination of that whole body of companies, and the Chasm phenomenon kind of came out of that.
So what was the advice? More and more companies are getting caught in the chasm, right?
Yep.
So for a startup, what's the quick answer? How do you get out?
The cool thing about it, the startup has the best chance of getting across a chasm of anybody, because the key to crossing a chasm is to play this adolescent game well. And the key to playing that game well is be a big fish in a small pond. So pick a pond which A, desperately wants fish, and B, is currently not big enough for a big fish to care about,
to fit into.
Right, exactly. So for a startup, that's easy, because I got $1 million or $2 million of revenue. The pond I'm going after is $50 million. To me, that looks like an ocean, but to HP, it looks like a water droplet. And so go, and to become the biggest fish in that pond quickly. Very quickly. So basically, you would do anything to become a bigger fish in that pond, and frankly, you don't do anything that isn't about that pond. So that level of focus creates a whole set of dynamics that are very, very conducive to success. And it was challenging, because the entrepreneur was saying, no, you understand, Jeffrey, I promised the VCs I was going to be a $1 billion company.
Right.
And fortunately, the VCs were able to side on my side of things and saying, yes, but that means passing through 10 million. So
you got to get to 10 first before you get to 100, before you get to $1 billion.
There are these base camps along you don't like sprint to the top of Everest. So
exactly. Yeah. Well, it is interesting, because the entrepreneurs kind of have this, first-time entrepreneurs have this kind of impression of, I've got this greatest idea, all I got to do is utter it, and I'm going to get stampeded with customers coming in the door.
And what's interesting about the web, and this has been fascinating, is that in the era of the web, we've actually separated technology adoption from technology monetization, which was never the case before. So crossing the chasm before was, you crossed the chasm with people that would pay you a bunch of money for a new technology and would be willing to take the risk because they have a very tough problem to solve. That's not what happened on the web. What happened on the web is we said, well, it's free. So if it's free, well, what the hell? I'll try it, right? So what you got, and what you still get on the web, are these massive adoption, we call them tornadoes, where they just go through the roof, but no monetization. And so now we're talking about crossing the monetization chasm, and even companies like Facebook, and you talked about Twitter, I mean, these very, very highly adopted, highly visible technology, it's not clear how well they are going to monetize. And so there's this whole sort of business model chasm that people are trying to negotiate. So the chasm still exists, but it definitely has shifted in the last.
But it's amazing. You were talking before about the fact that the culture here in the U.S. is, if you fail, you pop back up and you go do the next thing. And it is interesting, because you can have a conversation, you know, right away. Okay, this is a first-time entrepreneur versus this is somebody who's gone through the fire, you know. And you know, I've lost track. I've done like 7, you know, right? Yeah. And there's no stigma of, you know.
No, in fact, what a VC will ask you when you say, well, actually, I cratered at my last firm. It's kind of a smoking crater there, and you say, and the first question they will ask you inevitably is, what'd you learn? What'd you learn? And if you answer that question well, and if you haven't, to your point, if you haven't cratered yet, as a VC, I'm nervous because I'm not even sure you would know what it would look like.
Right, you wouldn't know what the edge of the cliff was looking like until you're over the edge,
and therefore you wouldn't alert me soon enough so that I could help you.
Right,
you'd actually have to, you know. And it's like I would like you to learn. I think you need to go through a crater. I'd like you to do that on somebody else's money,
not my firm's money. So you've got a lot of things going on. You're doing your consulting. You're also a venture partner.
And the book writing.
And the book writing. What's the new book?
Well, the problem is I'm not sure we're living in an era of the book, because one of the things I learned with the last bubble was I wrote a book right in the middle of the bubble. And it was the only book I've ever had to apologize for, because I actually released a second release in which the foreword said, "I'm sorry, I was just wrong." So when things are changing so fast in a bubble, I don't think it's a time for a book. But I do think it's. So I think blogs. I think you know all these things that we're doing right now. But mostly it's a time, I think, to just get out there and work in the fields, because the thing that's been really interesting about this downturn, well, it's true of all downturns, it puts everything in play. I mean, well, first of all, it takes all of the stuff that was kind of clogging up the works and it vaporizes. So all those things that were like distracting you, they all get vaporized because people said, we're not funding them. Okay, so now we're back down to, you know, real issues. And then the next thing is, and oh my God, my real issues are in flames. And so you get into firefighting mode. You get into these, we're calling them now sprints. We're normally used to doing projects in 3-month increments and probably 2, 3, 4 quarters to get through the entire thing. And now all of a sudden saying, well, first of all, I can't get budget for next quarter, but I have budget for this quarter.
Right, so hurry up.
So could we do like a year's worth of work in, say, 60 days? and so that you get this incredible compression. And what's exciting about that is your methods don't work, right? You think, oh my God. But that's the hand you're dealt. So you have to innovate now and figure, well, what can we get done? And how would we get it done? And so inevitably what happens is coming out of this, there'll be a complete, and it's already happening, a complete sort of new set of IP, or intellectual property around well, how do you solve the next class of problems?
Right.
It's really fun.
Yeah. It's the cycle rate for innovation is, you know, and it doesn't matter whether you're in the consulting business, the book writing business, or
that's right.
trying to develop the next PC.
It goes very, you know, it's interesting because it does. There are times when, in good times, it's a gentler sine curve.
Right.
And that's fine. I mean, you know, it's good times, right? Enjoy.
Yeah.
But in bad times, it gets pretty jittery.
Well, and then also you're seeing where there's this expectation that the total life cycle of an innovation is becoming much more compressed. Because it's easy for first person app, the first mover advantage benefit is so much shorter than what it was even a couple of years ago because of the rate at which other people can hop onto it, particularly with all the internet web services, cloud services, and the ability that, you know, 5 guys in a garage writes a piece of software. Guess what? As soon as that gets launched, 5 guys around the corner can do that exact same software and innovate on it.
So this is an important idea about innovation, which is, can you get genuine escape velocity from the gravitational field of all of your competitive set? And when you see people who are persistently stuck in a situation where we're saying our product life cycles are getting shorter and shorter and shorter, what they're really saying is we never get an innovation that really separates us from our competitors. It's like AMD versus Intel. I mean, AMD came out with dual core before Intel did, but they didn't really get separation from Intel. And so what looked like an incredible success became kind of a blip. So now there's 2 places you want to play that. So part of it is, guess what? That's called life. And so just, you know, learn to play this game at that level of cycle time. And that's how almost all consumer markets work.
Right.
They all work that way. Now, periodically, once a decade, something comes along. I would argue the iPhone is an example of something that came along, which said, no, I'm Apple. I establish a level of separation that it's going to take a decade for anybody to catch that thing, because it wasn't just a device; it was an ecosystem, and the App Store, and the iTunes, and the blah blah blah. So I think one of the things you got to think about is, in the continuous ongoing cycle of sort of normal innovation, I think all successful enterprises are pretty damn good at that. But this desire and this need, if we're really going to change the world, and the other thing, by the way, I think large enterprises are doing is buying other large enterprises. 9 times out of 10, that's the more probable thing. But there's the 10th time, and the 10th time is to have an organic innovation that fundamentally changes the economics of your industry. And I think you need one a decade. I don't think it's more than that. But I think you need one a decade, and it's crossing the chasm inside the belly of the whale. It's a hard. That adolescent phase is a very, very difficult phase to negotiate. But
yeah, and I think what we see is when I talk when I'm at Roche or other clients talking about everybody's got this insatiable interest on how to innovate. Is there some secret gift of God that you get bestowed? And my argument is it's a process and a skill. I mean, you can learn it, you can practice it, you become good at it, but you've also got to have an organization. You've got to, you have to have all the things you talked about. But two fundamental things are at least what I see in a lot of corporations driving the challenge, right? One is this innovation, gap, which is corporations have this insatiable need for good new ideas, not just in product and services, but all the things they do inside, right?
Everywhere.
And then the innovation delay. Once they got the idea, how long does it take for them to get from the idea to execution? Because there's this unrealistic expectation that I approved it and gave you the funding on Monday. What do you mean it's not done by Friday?
Yeah.
It's
done in my head.
Right, yeah. The PowerPoint looked great. Right?
200,000 people that have to actually get on board.
Yeah, exactly.
So this gets into an interesting issue, the interaction between innovation and change management. And what you really realize as you try to create an innovation that can have impact at scale, it very quickly becomes a really important change management. So when we're talking about organization and systems and all those things, you could arguably put that all under the rubric of change management. One other ingredient I think is important to add to the game is, at least, and this has been our experience, my personal experience and my firm's experience, we innovate by bolting ourselves onto an unsolved problem and not letting go. So we try to find a problem that we think is big, hairy, not solved, and then we say, we're going to bolt onto it and we are not going to let go. We're just going to ride that thing until we find it. And what's great about that is that problem pulls you through the universe. Mm-hmm. So we have no throw weight. I mean, we're a tiny little firm. But if you bolt yourself onto a problem, so I would argue bolting yourself onto global warming, bolting yourself onto education, bolting yourself onto healthcare, those are the 3 most obvious ones, and saying, no, we're going to actually solve it. And it's like people say, well, what are you talking about? You can't solve those problems. They're too big. No, we're not letting go. And when you do that, I think it takes you to places that you wouldn't have gone voluntarily. And it also takes you completely outside of the competitive sphere that you're in, because the competitive sphere you're in is a comfort zone. And these problems take you way outside the comfort zone, which means your competitors are not likely to follow.
Right. Exactly.
But you just have to be passionately committed to saying, I will not let go of the problem.
Final question. Got people, 20,000 listeners to the podcast, plus people visiting the HP site. The one question I think people would want to ask Jeffrey is, okay, Jeffrey, you've got all these years of experience. If you had to give me 3 pieces of advice, given everything that's going on in the world today, what would be the advice you're going to give kind of the typically that smaller company, getting ready to start out? What would be the things they should think about?
So so one of the 3 is what I just said. I think one of the 3 is, let's make one of the 3 find the problem you're passionate about that's unsolved and material to the world, and put yourself in service to the problem, which kind of relates to the second thing I think I would say, which is that innovation is an interesting combination of ego and humility. Okay? You need real ego to innovate, but you also have to have real humility. It's not about you. So the second lesson is, it's never about you. So I know you think it's about you, it's not about you. So if you can take you out of that equation and just be completely in service to the problem and the customer who owns the problem, it takes so many things off your plate that you'd have to worry about. And then the third thing, and those two are to me are like the really. I guess the third thing is when you find yourself in the wrong place, which you will. In fact, all of us at various times in our lives have been in the wrong place. You need to get out. And it happened to me once in a company where I just needed to leave the company. It wasn't that the company was particularly bad. I had a particularly bad manager. I couldn't get out from under that manager, and I needed to leave. But there are various places you get, and you realize if I don't fundamentally change the dynamic of my world, I'm on a track which is going to become increasingly less fulfilling. And you got to. I guess the thing is, life's not a dress rehearsal, right? I mean, this is the play.
You get one shot.
This is it. I mean, so
Well, Jeffrey, thanks a lot for spending the time with us today. We truly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast. Please send your feedback. Particularly, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on doing these kinds of interviews. The objective is to give you a broader exposure to others that are out there creating killer innovations. If you found this podcast interesting and you want to connect with other innovators, join the network. There's killer innovation groups now in existence over on LinkedIn and Facebook and a variety of the social sites. Also, feel free to follow me over on Twitter. Just do a follow, Phil McKinney. Also, pay it forward. For those of you that are regular listeners of the podcast, you know that my sole objective in the podcast is to pay it forward as a return to my early mentors. And when I asked them how to pay it back, they told me later in my career to pay it forward to others. All I ask is that you pay it forward. Thanks for the time out of your busy schedule. Look forward to talking to you real soon. Bye-bye.
This series of interviews with innovation thought leaders is made possible by support from thenextbench.com. For more information on the series and to listen to the previous episodes, visit thenextbench.com.